Hi, I'm Dr. Frances Yahia, and today I want to teach you about your trauma code. So first, let's talk about generational trauma. There's a lot of buzzwords going on. Generational trauma is first passed on in the womb during the pregnancy experience. What is it exactly? It is what I call a shadow love language or a trauma code. Of the 4 unmet needs that humans have, safety, security, protection, validation, and love and belonging is the most important. The way that we identify that we belong to a tribe or a clan is by passing on a trauma code. This is going to be passed on by the moon sign and by house. So I have a book coming out called The Shadow Side of the Love Language. You can go to my website and there is a workbook there on how to work through your trauma code and your shadow side of your moon, but I'm going to exactly explain what each of them mean. So what happens is during pregnancy, we have an idea that this is like a symbiotic state, but it's not. It's actually a parasitic state. No matter what your mother is feeling, you interpret that through your moon sign to believe that that is the language of love. It's actually a shadow love language. Not to say that the moon doesn't have positive things, but we're looking at the trauma code and the generational trauma. So what you do is you interpret whatever mom is feeling, hopelessness, depression, melancholy, violence, whatever, anger, whatever emotion she's feeling as your definition of love. And you can find that in your astrology chart. What's going to happen is this is going to be the lens in which you look for love dysfunctionally in the world, primarily in romantic relationships, but also in friends. So this definition of love is passed on in the womb. And what we think is, I belong to a clan, I belong to a tribe, I have love and belonging if I honor this trauma code. And so things in your life may not make sense why you continuously, let's say, attract violent relationships or addictions, and it's linked to your moon sign. So here's mine. Mine is in Cancer. Cancer is the placement of the moon, and people think, oh, wow, moon in Cancer, that's a great placement. It's absolutely not. The moon in Cancer at the trauma code level is a person who doesn't want to grow up. So psychologically and subconsciously, if I don't want to grow up, I can have infertility issues. I can be dependent or codependent. I can stay a child and never lose a virginity. I can lose my children either, like I said, through infertility or not having children, or in my case, the way I lived this out was I lost custody. So because we want to honor that trauma code and that generational trauma message of the love language, we will create situations unknowingly from the subconscious to honor that. The other thing is that this is the 8th house of shared resources. In my romantic relationships, even though I was the financial provider, I gave my finances away almost as if I paid to be loved. So I didn't understand why I was repeating these patterns until I identified that this was a generational trauma language. I've said before in another video that my moon is actually in opposition to my Mars, which is another version of generational trauma when you have oppositions. So men in the system, 2nd house of money, opposite moon, women in the system, 8th house of shared resources. What I did was instead of healing this, I flipped it on its head. Instead of being provided for, I became the provider. And so I lived out the thematic, losing custody, paying child support to a man. And I didn't understand the dysfunction until I realized that I was just honoring my trauma code. So what you're going to do is you're going to find your moon by sign and by house. If your moon is in Aries, what you're going to attract at a subconscious, and this is sort of like the worst case scenario, domestic violence or abuse. If you're looking for your moon in Taurus, you might attract OCD or hoarding or excess attachments. If you have a moon in Gemini, You might attract a lot of betrayal and lying, someone who does false promises or is never around and doesn't follow through. The moon in Cancer, you might attract men or women that are children or issues according to children and fertility. This can also represent emotional loyalties through illness as well. So for instance, the moon in Aries could be severe migraines, for instance. Taurus can be skin issues. Gemini can be lung and asthma issues. If you have the moon in Leo, you're going to seek attention. It might be narcissistic relationships, and heart issues could be a problem, or blood pressure or high cholesterol. If you have a moon in Virgo, there's going to be a tendency to attract sick people that you can take care of, or people that need assistance in terms of illness, that they struggle with some illness, or it could be OCD, perfection, and very critical, judgmental relationships. If you have the moon in Libra, the tagline for moon in Libra is honesty is complicated. These people may attract a lot of dishonesty in their relationships, and they don't understand why. It's because there's a lot of people pleasing and a tendency to have superficial relationships. A moon in Scorpio, all water moons, they want you to read your mind. But a moon in Scorpio can attract sexual illnesses, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, things like that. And it could be a trauma code with jealousy, possession, or criminal activity. If you have the moon in Sagittarius, it's someone who doesn't tend to go very deep in terms of their emotion or their self-awareness, but they can be very big escape artists, in the sense that maybe they're always at work or traveling or out with friends, and they can bring a lot of debauchery into the relationship. And it might be fun for a while, but it lacks depth. You can also have someone there that has issues with hips, or perhaps gluttony is an issue. The moon in Capricorn could be someone who has an excessive workaholic nature in terms of what you attract, or it can be someone very slothful and lazy, or it can be an extremely ambitious person where, let's say, their money and their desire for ambition overrides the romantic aspect of the relationship. The moon in Aquarius is what I call the jellyfish moon. It's someone who doesn't fully ever give themselves to you. They get close and then they pull out. They get close and they pull out. They have an extreme desire for freedom and not making roots. Generationally, what they're responding to is either tornadoes or hurricanes, natural elements that came that they had to flee. And a moon in Pisces is somebody who either attracts people that are very codependent, people that have addictions, people that need a mother, an end-all, be-all, universal mother. And they can have trouble with not only addictions, but also sexual issues, because if you have to be in mother role, no matter what, if you're male or female, all the time, there's no room for the womanhood or the malehood, which would be sexuality. So that's by sign. And now I want you to think that this is generational trauma. So when I started plotting my moon, I started realizing my mother lost a child. My aunt lost a child. My grandmother almost lost a child. There was a long lineage about how women lost children in the system. And so what I was doing when I lost custody on paper, even though I had 50-50 visitation with my spouse, I understood that I was being loyal to the women in the system, the moon in Cancer. So you want to do what I call a Mr. Potato Head, sort of start to piece it together. Right side of the chart, male, left side of the chart, female, or father, mother. The moon is the women in the system, or the emotional relationships, or the children in the system. By sign and by house can give you added pieces to the Mr. Potato Head. And then you make a sentence, and then you start realizing how you're living that out. We never can heal truly 100% the generational trauma in the sense that we're going to live something out. What we do is we go to the root, and then we raise the vibration or the consciousness around it so that it doesn't affect us and we have a different perspective. So the idea that just knowing this is sufficient is not true. Oftentimes ceremony is very, very useful, ceremony and ritual. I do have a phenomenal ancestral ceremony in my Witch Bitch book that I highly recommend. It's extremely powerful. Cut out, or you can print out 12 sets of feet, and also get 12 pictures of babies. If you have family members in your system, if not, print them out from the internet. And what I would do is find either a moon that speaks to you or a night that speaks to you, maybe a marked date. I would recommend to do it outside if you're able to. If not, open some sort of sacred space at home. And then step on the feet and see what starts to come up. You're going to start to intuitively feel the 12 generations past and start out loud speaking everything that comes. When I did this with a few women several years ago. There was a lot of religious persecution in my particular one. One of my friends had a lot of prostitution come up through her feet. And what you're doing is you're connecting to the ancestors and you're asking them to release you of this lineage, of this emotional attachment and emotional loyalty for you to feel loved. There are other ways, healthy ways to feel belonging. So what I've done was I don't eliminate, obviously what happened. I can't eliminate that, but I went to the root and identified that what I need is shared resources with women. And then I started creating a really solid female group of friends that we do spiritual activity, ceremony, ritual, and so forth. So it's not that that gets eliminated, you just raise consciousness around it. But the moon by sign, by house. My book, The Shadow Side of the Mother's Love, is coming out later this year. And I'm going to have all the trauma codes in detail, explaining all of this in terms of how it's passed on in pregnancy and so forth. But in the meantime, you can go to my website, dryahia.com, and download the workbook. Thank you.